Stretch it out. All right.
And we're live. I'm posting
We're
the
live.
link. Yeah,
We
I'm
are.
posting the link.
All right. All's good. We're going to get started. Okay. Awesome. Well, we're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the AMA here put on by Equilibrium. We're really excited. Apologies for being a minute or two late. Our guest, Yves, and I were just chatting about our pasts and some overlap that we have, which we'll get to in a little bit. But welcome, and to get your DeFi or decentralized finance questions ready, because we've got an exciting show and an exciting guest today. But before we get started, tell you a little bit more about us at Equilibrium. We are a decentralized framework for generating asset-backed stablecoins and building the next generation of DeFi or decentralized finance applications. Today's AMA is the first of many AMAs that we're going to be doing in the coming months with various guests, friends, and family of the community to talk about what's happening, not just in DeFi, but also in EOS and the greater community of blockchain and distributed ledger. Now, for those who this may be your first AMA or Ask Me Anything, you'll have the chance to engage with our guest, Mr. Yves LaRose of EOS Nation, who's sitting on the other side of me here. You'll get the chance to engage with him in real time. And the way that this works is that we'll ask a series of questions, and then for you, the community, get to ask whatever you want to poor Yves. So if you have any questions, join our Telegram chat. If you haven't already, drop them in, and Mike from our team will be flagging those questions, sending them to me to ask to Yves. So if they're relevant for what we're talking about at the time, I'll try to interject. If not, we'll save them to the end. Anything we don't get to, we'll try our best to follow up with after this session as well. So again, any questions, drop them in Telegram. Mike from our team has them. Without further ado, actually, one more thing. We are doing something of a little bit of a twist before we get to Mr. Yves over here. So as you put questions in, because we are so appreciative, because we care so much about all of the support you guys continue to give us and continue to give us feedback, that we want to give for your participation the best question. The winner will get 40 EOSDT tokens.
Nice.
Oh yeah. So Yves will be paying attention. This is the one thing he has other than to listen to me moderate. He will, at the very end of the episode, select the best question, and that winner will follow up with you afterwards to get your information and send you over some tokens. So, okay, now, without further ado, I'm Kyle. Yves, you're Yves.
Yes,
tell us a little bit about yourself. It's now your turn to talk.
Yeah. So first of all, awesome introduction. Really happy to be here. I really like doing these AMAs. This is not the first time that I do something like this. I've done them live as well. I remember doing a Google Entrepreneur AMA, but in person as well. So there was an online component, but there was a room. I was in a room full of people. And what I liked about it was I always tell people any question is fair play. You can talk about if it has to do with blockchain, that's great. That's kind of what got us here right now. It has to do with Equilibrium or with EOS, obviously that's great. But if you want to ask me about stuff about myself, go for it as well. So and then there's a so any question is fair play. Obviously, like Kyle said, there's potentially a best question thing. So be creative with your questions. I've had some really interesting questions in the past that have nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it really gave an insight on who I am. And I think that that's part of kind of what this is. Who am I? How did I get here? So I'll give you guys a little bit of a rundown. My name is Yves LaRose. I'm from Canada, the eastern part of Canada. I am Francophone. My native language, my mother tongue is French. I grew up in that part of the country. I grew up in the capital of Canada called Ottawa. And in Ottawa, particularly, it's a very bilingual area because we're on the border of Quebec and Ontario. So it's a very particular dynamic in Canada, that particular region. And it really gave me it really does affect, the reason why I mention it is because it is relevant to kind of where I am today. It is a government town And typically, we call that region as well, kind of that area of Canada, the Silicon Valley North. Obviously, everybody knows Silicon Valley. And the region where I am, we call it Silicon Valley North because in Canada, it's kind of the region where all the tech happens. In the 2000, tech boom, a lot of the area within Ottawa was where a lot of the large international, multinational companies were located that got affected by the boom. But there was a lot of technology happening there with Lucent Beam, with Lucent Alcatel, with Nortel. There's Corel at the time, which was a competitor to I think it was before even Word. It was Corel WordProof, I think, or something like that. But why I mention that is because I grew up in a family with many uncles. A lot of them were software engineers, network engineers. Basically, I had access to computers from a very, very young age. I built my first computer when I was 6 years old. I started programming when I was 7. For me, the hardware component was really kind of where I was at, but still, learned programming, learned coding up until I went to university. I started off in software engineering. I did that for a year, realized that was more of a hobby, that I liked doing it for myself. At the time, I was overclocking quite a bit. We're talking about, going to give my age away, 1999. I was overclocking, that was university. I was overclocking quite a bit. It wasn't really a thing back then. There was no Alienware. There was no Dell hadn't bought Alienware. Alienware didn't even exist. Basically, people were just kind of tweaking with hardware and trying to get more performance out of rigs. And in order to do so, you really had to hack around. You really had to, I remember the first CPU that I overclocked was Intel 433 DX66 or something like that. And you had to take 2 pins, give them a short with a screwdriver or whatever, basically create a short, which then unlocked the multipliers in the BIOS, and you could add more voltage. And that's how I kind of started that. And I'm talking about when I'm 10 years old, 12 years old. But again, I always had uncles that gave me access to hardware that I could play around with, that I could break, whatever. So, came from that, went to university, decided that wasn't really my thing for software anyways, pivoted to psychology, actually first off to linguistics, mathematics, and then I ended up in psychology. I did a major in psychology and neuropsychology more specifically, got a bachelor's in science as well. I was thinking of going into med school, applied for med school, and decided life took a turn, decided not to do that. But I really wanted to bridge the computer aspect and that kind of logical engineering ones and zeros aspect with the human aspect, which is non-logical, it's emotional, it's messed up. You can't really predict it, although populations can be predicted and population behavior can be somewhat predicted in good times anyways. That bridge really, really interested me. So that's where I focused my studies, started doing business, moved to Japan for what I thought was going to be 1 year. Ended up staying for 6 years, learned the Japanese culture, the Japanese language, integrated business within that. That's when blockchain started. So while I was in Japan, 2010, I started mining Bitcoin. Everybody asked, do you still own those Bitcoins that you were mining at like a penny? No, I do not own the penny Bitcoins anymore. When I first started mining Bitcoin, was about February, I think 2010. The earliest price that I remember Bitcoin at is 11 cents. I think 11 cents, fluctuating between 9 and 11 cents is what I remember mining a lot of Bitcoin at. I remember, again, because of that hardware passed, at the time it was ATI, it wasn't AMD, hadn't bought ATI yet, so it was ATI Radeons in SLI, and basically I had video cards running across my ceiling, because obviously they generate a lot of heat, and basically just connecting them by SLI one to another, mining Bitcoin, not having any idea that this would eventually become somewhat a revolution like it has in a way, or impacting DeFi. So getting to DeFi, impacting DeFi the way that it has, opening doors. So I kind of left that space, went back to study some more, started working for the federal government as a behavioral economist, did some work there for about 6 years, the federal government in Canada, all while in the background doing some business work, some entrepreneurship work. blockchain space started rearing its head again, let's say 2015, Mt. Gox hacks. That's when I started getting back into it a little bit more. 2016, got really into it. 2017, everything knows what happens. I was really into it back then. By then, I was working in national politics in Canada for the National Chief First Nations Assembly of First Nations in Canada. And that's when I met my love, EOS. We fell in love quite quickly. Read the white paper, just followed Dan Larimer before, just really amazed at kind of where the space was at the time. Blockchain 1.0, 2.0, you got the smart contracts, and then what I call 3.0, or what everybody calls 3.0, I guess, and kind of that scalability, that base. Now blockchain could actually be used, at a scalable level, and what that means for DeFi, what that means for applications, what that means for me as an entrepreneur to be able to participate perhaps in this, because DPoS, very, very different than POW. You got some sustainability issues with POW. You've got some established mining farms. I'm not going to become an established mining farm tomorrow, but with DPoS, perhaps that's my way to get back in. So I meet a bunch of other guys that are very, very passionate about EOS as well. We are all decentralized. We're in different cities. We're in even different countries within EOS Nation. We have 7 founders, another sixth grade bunch of guys, and we decided to form EOS Nation at the time. This is early 2017, January. We actually, so January 21st, so 3 days ago, I'm in Japan right now, so it's the 24th of January. January 21st is when we had the first call, let's become block producers. So our 3-year anniversary, I guess, of shall we become, no, 2018, sorry. So our 2-year anniversary of let's become block producers just happened 3 days ago.
Congratulations.
And then what did that mean? Thank you.
Yeah.
What did that mean at that time? We had no idea. We read the white paper. We had an idea of what we could do. And then the rest is history. I think the rest is, us becoming block producers, us focusing on community, focusing on infrastructure, focusing on global relationships, pushing the DeFi space as well. We're heavily involved in multiple DeFi projects, including Equilibrium, which I think is an amazing project on EOS and will contribute and is already contributing quite greatly to the space. And then here I find myself in an AMA a couple of years later, and I just kind of resumed in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 37 years of my life.
That's well, and now you've given away your age. It wasn't with the processor hacks. It's now been given away. It's funny your history. So you and I, like I said, have overlap. You started building computers or messing around with them at 6. You did that at 14. Programming.
I remember
7.
burning them, by the way. I did
too.
So I remember one thing. I don't know if you've ever done that, but I remember I had carpet in my home, and I would, how you can build up static electricity. So I would rub my feet and then go to my monitor and touch it and then try to pop it. I don't know why I did that. I was like 8 years old. It was awesome. I burned a lot of hardware when I was growing up.
We were a part of a very exciting time in technology, very similar to where we are now with blockchain. And again, we'll just refer to that as blockchain or DLT for the remainder of the call. But back then, we didn't necessarily grow up with a lot of technology, or if anything, we were coming into the age of tech, right? Being able to melt or short circuit, overclock computers in different ways, learning how they worked, how they functioned, learning the early days of programming, and then finding use cases for those, right?
Yeah.
The first time I learned how to program was on Angel Fire. For those who are listening that remember that, gold star to all of you. Putting little GIFs and little colors here and there, and then very quickly started learning what a use case was from the knowledge I had gained, right? To start a business, to mine Bitcoin, to do this, to do that, just as you did. Well, now we're here in this next wave, right? Where this new generation of technology is upon us. We've had the chance to play with some really unique stuff. Now it's time to do something with it. So I want to dive in, but before we go there, let's circle back again, just to level set with everybody and kind of help further educate this community, because we can all use more education as things are changing second by second in our industry. When you guys originally started this, EOS Nation, and determined to become block producers, what is a block producer? What does that mean? And I know it's the basic question. Everyone in the community might be a little nervous, but let's just start with the foundation.
So in EOS, the consensus mechanism is called Delegated Proof of Stake, DPoS, which is very different if you're used to a proof of work type of consensus mechanism, which is what we have in Ethereum, what we have in Bitcoin, where hash rate and hash power essentially determines who is able to make modifications to the network. In EOS, the people that are selected to make modifications to the network are not necessarily those with the most. There's no correlation, let's say, to hash rate or hash power. It's the amount of tokens that token holders have, and they delegate their votes, or they vote for entities that they believe bring value to the ecosystem. And value is very subjective and can come in multiple different forms. But essentially, you've got one EOS token, you've got one vote. You've got a million EOS tokens, you've got a million votes. And what we have in EOS is we've got an ongoing election, if you wish. It's live all the time. It never ends. And basically, you as an EOS token holder get to determine who you believe, or get to voice your opinion on who you believe is best poised or best placed to bring value to your asset, to the utility token that you hold. Basically, the best value you think will make the network grow, that will make the network more reliable. Whatever metric is important for you, you have that many voices based on how many tokens you have. And so, as a block producer, or in EOS, I should say, there are 21 selected entities that meet the threshold to become block producers, official block producers. So the 21 organizations that gather the most amount of votes are essentially the ones placed into position to be network operators. They're the ones who actually run the chain. If there are any modifications to make to the chain, any upgrades, any fixes, any issues, they're the ones that basically have the control. Out of the 21, any change, any network level change requires 15 out of 21 signatures. So it is very, very decentralized. These organizations are independent organizations. They have overlap in terms of values and in terms of perhaps interests, but really there are 21 different organizations. And then when a change is brought up, then they debate and they look at data, and then they decide together whether or not they will approve or not, and everything is on chain. It's very similar to a POW and a proof of work type of environment where the miners would have somewhat of the stakeholders in the network, like the miners would have a say in what happens based on which transactions they put in or not. Well, the block producers kind of have that power in EOS. And so we are officially a block producer. We're currently ranked, I believe, in 3rd position worldwide by terms of votes. Now in EOS, outside of the top 21, you have other organizations that are they're trying to be official block producers. So they're still trying to bring value to the network to gain those votes, to be able to be in position, because your income is directly proportionate to the amount of votes that you have and whether or not you're in or out of the top 21. So if you're in the top 21, you get a little bonus. And if you're out of the 21, you don't get that bonus. But regardless of where you are, you get a percentage, or you get a number of rewards per day, EOS per day, based on the votes that you have. So you're incentivized to keep working and to bring value to the ecosystem, even if you're outside of the top 21. And EOS Nation, for the most part of the first year, was just on the edge of the 21. We kept going in and out, but more out than in. And so it's this ongoing competition that occurs. And so as a block producer, your main responsibility is to operate the network and to make sure that there's a smooth, reliable, efficient network that is being run, so that the users and anybody who interacts with the blockchain has a smooth experience. That's really your core responsibility, to protect the asset, to really do what you can to not just keep it where it is, but to increase its value. And that, again, that's subjective on how that happens. that's a block producer. And that's kind of what we now know to be a block producer. I think the idea of what a block producer was when we first joined and what we thought it would be is different than what it is today. What a block producer is today is different than what it was, let's say, a year ago, because the needs of the network change over time. So the actions that block producers must take in order to meet basically the requests of the token holders, because the token holders are in power. The delegated portion, the delegated proof of stake, token holders who have stake in the network, they delegate that power to block producers. So block producers are in a way delegated power, but they do not have power. The power always remains to the token holders. So at any given time, this election that I was talking about, token holders can remove votes from block producers, effectively affecting rankings and changing who's in, who's out, how much they get paid, etc. Right? So it's the ongoing competition that is very powerful in EOS. And what that does is that we see that the needs of the network change based on the needs of the users, based on the needs of the token holders. Right now, for example, we're in a bear sideways market for a very long period of time. So that affects kind of who's in power and who's got that responsibility based on what they offer back in return in terms of value. And that will continuously ebb and flow based on where the network is at what given time. And that's the big power behind the delegated proof of stake consensus mechanism that is created behind EOS. And that's really just the governance portion, right? In terms of the tech portion, EOS is an incredibly fast blockchain. It propagates blocks at every 500 milliseconds. And so it's very, very, very quick. Lots of reversible block happens. So lib happens in roughly 3 minutes, 180 seconds or so. And so you're able to, for DeFi purposes, do a lot of things on EOS that you were not able to do on Ethereum, or that you're not able to do on Bitcoin, either because the costs are prohibitive, because in EOS, they are feeless transactions. So it's not free transactions, they're feeless. So the amount of EOS that you have gives you access to network resources. The more EOS you have, the more network resources you have. The more network resources you have, think about it like you can just transact more often, more frequently, more heavy transactions at any given time. When you don't have the EOS required to do the transactions that you're looking to do, you can then rent resources from others who are not using those resources. And we've got a rec system in place, a resource exchange model in place. And all this ties together and kind of what makes EOS somewhat magical, and why we chose to, as a group, come onto EOS, because we really saw this as the first time that a blockchain could be in a position where our skill set and the vision that we have for what is going to be the Internet 3.0, we found that we would have a place in there, and that the blockchain itself, the product itself, gave us basically the possibilities, and now it's up to us to create. But the base software, the EOS.io software, is powerful, and it is coded in such a way that it enables us to do what we want to do in this future world.
What is your grand vision for the future of the web? So Web 3.
I think a big part of why I came here is because of decentralization. But decentralization is a spectrum. So for me, it's I think having the power of choice is a big one. And in this case, a lot of the interactions, or I would say almost every interaction that we have on a daily basis, somehow connects to the internet, somehow connects to the global communication stream that we use, the internet. And unfortunately, but fortunately, the internet is very centralized, and that's good, because in order to create a system, centralization is incredibly efficient. But over time, kind of letting go of that power, and really, in my opinion, to take it to the next step, like to get a level up, a serious level up, decentralization is really key. Having that choice, because based on your use cases, centralization has a place and decentralization has a place. Decentralization comes with kind of a level of giving up power, and so it increases trust from the user base that's interacting with you. And certain functions would remain centralized, and certain functions would be decentralized. And I really see a future, a vision where that interaction between centralization and decentralization becomes incredibly smooth. That you do, as an end user, you do not see a difference, but what happens in the actual result is that your data is safer, that you have control over your data, hacks and centralized hacks, as we know them, data leaks, that kind of thing, those become kind of a thing of the past. It's not to say that there won't be any issues, but a big portion of what currently is holding back the internet, and not only from a security point of view, but also from a developer point of view, of having to learn that security because it's not embedded in the protocol level, that gets abstracted. And so we also see that a marginal cost of products go significantly down because you can just focus on your product. You don't have to focus on the security protocol level. So I see that interaction become much more fluid. And basically, it's just more choice to the user, more choice to developers. And we're just going to see, I think, a greater slew of product that really fits users' needs. And I want to be a part of that.
I love it. I love it. We've got a question here from Daniel, and just before I ask it, I've got kind of a stage-setting question for you. And we talked about why you got into this, but also we're now here into 2020. So EOS has had a new release. There's 2.0 out there. What are your thoughts on the 2.0 release, and kind of what does it bring to the broader ecosystem? The benefits. And then Daniel, we're going to get to your question as well, but go ahead, Yves.
Right now, 2.0 is a blessing and a curse. And I say that because right now EOS is the past week in EOS from a back-end point of view, it has been very, very challenging. EOS 2.0, what it does with EOS VM is it really opens up the floodgates for transactions, for the amount of transactions per second that the network can handle goes up drastically. We're talking about depending, let's say 5 to 8 a multiplier in terms of how much it can handle. So right now we've handled, I think the highest on a record for EOS as it currently is running is 3,996 transactions per second. So 4,000 transactions per second. And within those transactions, you've got multiple actions. So I don't recall what the number is, but much greater than that. But let's say transactions per second, about 4,000. EOS 2.0, depending on the type of transactions, could theoretically, and we've already seen this on testnets, bring that up to let's say 8 times more. That's I think would be at the very edge. But we're talking about 20 to 24,000 transactions per second. If we put that in context, Ethereum does 15 transactions per second. Bitcoin does 3 to 4. Let's say Ethereum, 15 to 18. Bitcoin 3 to 4. Now we're talking about 24,000 transactions per second, and within each transaction, you can have multiple actions. This really, really, really opens up, and it really kind of what brought me here is that scalability that EOS is able to achieve. So for me, that's a huge, huge, huge key component in seeing this eventually, because we're not there yet at all, but eventually if we want this technology to be adopted by the mainstream, so if we're talking about 2005 Facebook level mainstream adoption, not 1994 or 1999 GeoCities style of adoption, but really like massive mainstream. Your grandma's on Facebook. Well, now your grandma's using the blockchain. She doesn't even know it, type of thing. We really need to have EOS 2.0 is a serious upgrade in that direction, where you're going to need a massive amount of throughput that's possible. And so that's a blessing. That's really kind of the vision. That's where we're heading. Why I say it's also a curse at the same time is, well, like in order to be able to accommodate those transactions, you need some serious hardware and you need to optimize. So when I mentioned earlier that it's very different than EOS is very different than traditional proof of work systems. We don't have a mining farm. We don't have rooms with tons of dedicated, hardware pieces of infrastructure that just do one thing and they do it really, really rapidly, and you can just build more and more and more of them. That's not the same thing. So we're legitimately running real data center infrastructure, server grade infrastructure, gaming grade infrastructure as well for some specific tasks, because EOS is very much CPU intensive. In order for you to process that amount of blocks and to process them quickly, going back again to that 500 millisecond, you need very, very, very high frequency CPUs. And at this time, it's still very much single-threaded. They're multi-threaded functions, so it's using multiple cores, but really the majority, the crux of it is really single-threaded, one core kind of deal. And in order to accommodate that 24,000 transactions per second, your infrastructure needs to be very, 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 very finely tweaked, but not just yourself, because you're in a decentralized network. If your neighbor, the person giving you the blocks, or if the neighbor after the person you're giving the blocks to is not also finely tweaked, then it causes microforks and it's causing issues. And right now we're seeing, because EOS 2.0 has been released, and again it's decentralized, the public can start deploying and using EOS 2.0. So they are now pushing a ridiculous amounts of transactions. So think about it. We just had a call with the team. Think about it like a highway. The highway was running through. There's a lot of cars. Well, now we're in a situation where the highway's only got, let's say, 8 lanes, but the amount of cars that are coming through that are being pushed on this highway just went 8 times higher. And so now we're like, okay, we now need to widen the highway to accommodate all those cars. But if I widen my highway in going into the city, and now your highway from that city on is only 3 lanes, you're now the bottleneck. So everybody's upgrading. We're now seeing in the last 7 days the single largest infrastructure upgrade, all decentralized in EOS that we've seen since the network launch. Everybody is doing some massive upgrades, not only to the qualitative portion of their infrastructure, but also the quantitative portion of their infrastructure. So how many nodes they're running, how many access points they're giving out, how many peering nodes, how many API nodes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a lot of sleepless nights lately because of, in part because of EOS 2.0. But it's really good, because if we want to have enterprise level applications that run on a network, we need to go through this period, and we need to optimize to be able to handle those transactions.
So Daniel, I hope that answered your question. Just for reference, Daniel was wondering if the 2.0 release would fix the CPU issues. So
2.0 is actually kind of indirectly it's causing these issues. So right now what's happening is, again, going back to the analogy of kind of highways, cars on a highway, we've now opened the floodgates so that so many cars can be on the highway, and now we're now making infrastructure upgrades. We're now widening the highway lanes, and so in part, it's not necessarily going to fix. It's actually the opposite. It's somewhat causing it. And what's going to happen is when we all upgrade to 2.0. So right now, I need to actually give a premise as well that we're not entirely sure what's causing all of these microforks. So we have multiple theories. We've got teams working around the clock. Block 1 is involved. We've got a bunch of different stakeholders in the network that are helping us diagnose this. And we're basically removing one variable at a time to really eliminate potential issues one at a time. And we really don't have a particular cause. My own theory, and it's shared by other people as well, is that we reached a tipping point. So this highway analogy that I used is very much what I believe is happening. So what I think is going to, in a way, help with the CPU is, again, all that infrastructure-based upgrade. And then when block producers start enabling 2.0, the idea was to enable it maybe in a trickling fashion slowly. But what we see is if one person upgrades it 2.0, then they can accommodate more transactions, but it pushes all the other people are now lagging behind, and they can't no longer sync with this one. And so it actually creates more issues. So we will most likely need to somehow upgrade almost all at once. But in order to do that, that means now we open the floodgates. So now we've got major highways, but then we've got cities, and the cities don't have the hospitals necessary. So we need to make sure that the cities have the hospitals, they have the public schools, whatever it is, so that when EOS 2.0 gets implemented throughout, now we're going to see a massive influx in transactions that we can actually accommodate those transactions. So will 2.0 solve the issue? In a way, no, it's the opposite. In a way, what it does is just permits more transactions. And one of the things we're seeing right now is a lot of miners on EOS, and they're pushing an absurd amount of transactions. So as long as there's going to be people pushing transactions, which is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. If we want to move to a space where voice launches on EOS, where enterprise grade applications launch on EOS, we need to be able to handle ridiculous volumes of data. This is in a way a test to get there. This is a stepping stone that we must go through.
We're in SimCity version 1 coming into SimCity version 2.
Crazy. I hope that those analogies kind of ring a bell with somebody, because I'm trying to explain it so that people can understand, because not everybody necessarily has a tech background, but yeah, that's kind of the general idea.
Yeah, I mean, I make the joke in reference, but I think it is a very easy way to start to understand this, just from an everyday concept. So Justin, shout out, Justin has a question for you. Yes. I think it's pretty timely. Do you think Block 1 release 2.0 in the right time? So based on everything you just said, is this the right time or the wrong time for this release?
That's a really good question. It's not good or bad. It is. I would say it's good in the sense that we need to go through this. We need to go through these growing pains. So there's not a good or a bad time. There was no timing for this. This is a decentralized network. It just is. And it's our job as block producers to ideally be proactive. And so when things happen, we can predict as much as possible, and it's a smooth transition. But if not, because certain things you just can't really predict the level of change. I mean, we ran the network, we ran tests, of course, but there are certain things that we just can't really model until it's released out in the wild, because human behavior, going back to my background in psychology, human behavior is not predictable. Humans can just throw a wrench in your wheels and for no reason, and then you can't really predict that. You can't model every single thing. So I think it's needed. I think it's in a way good, but it's not necessarily good or bad. But it's good because we need to go through these growing pains before there's significant use of the chain. And right now, the uses of the chain are still pretty niche. In the grand scheme of things, still very niche. And so from that point of view, it's really good that it's happening now, and really good that we see everybody basically being responsive, upgrading, doing what they need to do in order to protect the chain, protect the value. Very good question. There's no, in a decentralized network like this, there's no time for good or bad. It just, we need to be there. We need to be ready, and things move at an incredibly rapid pace. So we just need to be on the ball.
So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about Block 1 and potential use case as well. So I think if anyone's not here familiar, Block 1 is developing a new social platform, new social network called Voice, which launches, I believe, still around Valentine's Day, February 14th.
The beta, yes.
The beta. But with all that you just said, and all the greatness we just spoke about around EOS, they announced that they are not going to be building it on the mainnet.
No, that's
instead of
CoinDesk really ruined that for everybody. That's this is my question, and I do not get a chance to win, just to be clear, but this is my question. Why? You have all of what we just said, and now you're going to go, just for the public's reference, the CoinDesk article that Yves and I are mentioning, where this came from, was a release that Block 1 would be releasing the beta, potentially the full version of Voice, their social platform, on a private build of EOS. Yeah, correct.
The public. So that's the reference of my question. So why? Why do you think they're doing this? Why go down that path?
That's a smart thing to do. The issue I have with Brady Dale's article is, obviously it's a clickbait article. There's nothing necessarily factually wrong with what is in the content of the article, but the title is very much misleading. EOS, so Block 1, the way that it's written is EOS is not launching voice on the mainnet, and that's not accurate. There is a distinction. So the beta will be launching, or the tentative launch date, the one that's been said, is February 14th. If you're going to be releasing a beta version, you would not deploy on the mainnet. That makes absolutely no sense. And so you would be releasing on a test net, because you're going to be in a highly iterative state where you're going to be testing and making modifications. You don't want to release something out on a official mainnet when you're going to be making changes all the time, especially if those changes will require the block producers or whoever to be as fast at iterating than you are. Just makes absolutely no sense. I guess the way that I could give a link is, for example, Equilibrium right now. Equilibrium has in its framework wrap to open up the smart contracts to M6, so to allow people, other trusted entities, to be signatories when Equilibrium makes changes to particular smart contracts within their framework. Well, Equilibrium still hasn't done that. And that is a smart decision. And Equilibrium would not have done that, let's say 4 months ago, when you're changing the code every 2 hours. If every 2 hours you had to go through to a decentralized group of individuals and say, by the way, I need you to review this code and re-sign it, it makes no sense. So it's the same thing with Block One. They will be releasing the beta in a private test net. And then what they said is, ideally, over time, components will be on the mainnet. So that's the kind of the other argument. Well, what do you mean by components will be on the mainnet? Why not the whole thing? One of the things that we learned over the last year is, and this goes back to, I think, a flawed perception of what blockchain would be, in my opinion, from DApp developers and from stakeholders' point of view, is that everything needs to be on the blockchain. Everything does not need to be on the blockchain. Certain functions, certain capacities, certain parameters you would like to have on a blockchain because they have a use case for them, or they have, you want to have that trustless aspect to them. But not everything needs to be on the blockchain. So for voice, for example, maybe the likes, I'm assuming there's going to be a like function or some kind of upvote, downvote. Maybe that doesn't need to be on the mainnet. Maybe that can be on a private server, or maybe that can be run on another iteration of EOS.io where there are other block producers there, but not on the mainnet. Maybe, for example, if they collect KYC data, simply for regulatory laws, maybe they can't put it on the blockchain because of GDPR. Maybe they have to put it in a private data center in Switzerland. Maybe that component will be there. Maybe the likes will be on a separate chain. But my opinion, and what I think, but we're all stipulating at this point, is the financial settlement layer should be, and I believe it would be, on the mainnet, and your identity layer would be on the mainnet. So your account and the financial aspect. And the reason why I say that is that's really where a lot of value comes from. People don't necessarily care whether their like is centralized or not, but they do care that, let's say, if they have $5 or whatever it is in their account, that's decentralized and that's trusted and it belongs to them and nobody can go and mess around with that. They want to make sure that their data linked to their account or whatever, that's decentralized and nobody can go and mess with that. So I think what Voice is going to be doing, what Block One is going to be doing, is incredibly powerful. Again, this is all stipulation. I think what's going to happen is Block One will show us for the first time an architectural blueprint for what building a large-scale enterprise level application would look like on a blockchain. So you would do this and this part, this and this part, this and this part, and this and this part. And what we've seen over the last couple of months more specifically is that a lot of applications have migrated away from the mainnet. Mainnet is a very expensive playground to be in. Think about it like being in the middle downtown New York. You're in Central Park. Well, maybe you're going to have your storefront in Central Park, but you're not going to have your headquarters there. You're going to have your headquarters somewhere, on the outskirts of the city or whatever, where rent is cheaper because you need more people there or whatever. So people are going to, I think, and that's what Block One is going to do, I believe, is give us that blueprint for, well, maybe this function is here, this function is here, this function is here, and this is how you can optimize. Because at the end of the day, blockchain is more expensive than, let's say, centralized DLT, or centralized architectures. Because, they are decentralized. There's a cost of that. Resources are finite. You need to pay for resources. There's only so many resources on the network to go around. So if you put everything on the mainnet, that comes at an incredibly high cost, and it's not really efficient. And so we're moving away, I believe, from that space where everybody was putting everything on the blockchain to what should go on the blockchain, which functions, and then how to build those bridges. So the idea that Block One isn't releasing everything on the mainnet is, in my opinion, a wise decision. It is the only decision. I don't see how you would not do this. And specifically the testnet, it makes no sense for Block One to release a beta version on the mainnet. So not surprising at all.
Yeah, I think you followed the path I was going to ask again as well. Is this a path towards enterprise applications? We know from dapps.com's recent report, they just put out their annual market usage report for 2019, that EOS really took the dApps landscape, we'll just say, by storm. Tons of usage, tons of transactions. Leader, I think, in transactions, as it was
by far.
Yeah, just generating $5 billion in volume, led over 50% more than anyone else.
More than all of the others combined by far. It's not even close. Yeah, it's not even close.
And a huge shout out if you haven't read that report. It's very fascinating and in depth. But while we're seeing all that activity there, what is lacking, and I think you're pointing this out, is that blueprint for enterprise. Enterprise right now has many options within the landscape to kind of go to. Where EOS hasn't been in that conversation always. And I think you're pointing out why and where it could go as well. So, okay, we've got some questions that have followed in while we were chit-chatting. So, all right, from the YouTube follower, yet to be named.
Yet to be named. Hello, yet to be named.
Yeah, so this one Mike threw in for us. So, what is the number one feature you would like to see in the EOS software?
That currently doesn't exist?
That currently doesn't exist. They didn't add that, so we'll add that. What's one thing you could have? Oh, Kevin. That was Kevin. Kevin, shout out to you.
Really tricky question. What isn't there at the base core level that I would like to have? I'm adding the base core level because I'm assuming it has to be at the base core level. That way everybody gets access to that functionality. Mm-hmm. Let me think about that in the background. We'll come back to it because it's a really good question. It's a really, really good question.
Kevin, you might be in the top. You might be in the top of the ranks for the best question. Okay, we did have one more. Let me scroll up. Armadillo Crypto. That's the name of the individual who's asking. So Armadillo. Great username, by the way. Wrapped tokens as a bridge between tokenomics. So say a EOSDT on Ethereum blockchain or wrapped BTC on EOS blockchain. How can EOS get the capitals from Ethereum or Bitcoin markets?
I think I understand the question. And if I understand it, I'm not the CTO. If I understand it,
and I'm just reading.
I believe that already exists. The reason why I'm saying that is if we look at, there are a couple of places that currently do this, but the one that really pops to mind is WhaleX, the WhaleX exchange. They have created bridges where you're able to effectively bridge from Bitcoin to Ethereum to EOS. And they've wrapped those tokens, and so you're issued the equivalent, and you're able to transact on a decentralized. So WhaleX is WhaleX.com, I believe, is a decentralized exchange running on EOS, and they do have those features. So if you want to go check that out, I believe that answers your question. And what we're seeing with that actually is massive volume. So the latter part of the question was saying, I think if I understood it correctly, how can we kind of take away or gain access to the funds that are currently on Ethereum in a way? Well, it's through things like this. And so one of the ways, let's say, is WhaleX currently. I think Equilibrium is also doing that. Bitfinex is also doing that with, let's say, USD Tether versus USD Omni. So there are multiple solutions popping up, but I like this question because we at EOS Nation are making some progress in that direction as well. We're investing a lot of resources in this, specifically in 2020. It's part of our roadmap. We're already building some smart contracts around these because we believe that 2020 stable coins and relays between, interoperability between different chains, especially in the DeFi space, is going to be really, really key. It's going to be, we believe, a massive area of growth. We're already seeing that DeFi is really kind of the main driver between a lot of the products right now, a lot of the blockchains right now. And so if you're able to build the foundations to have better, smooth transition basically between those cash flows, those asset flows, it opens up a lot of doors. And I think that we're at a time right now where the other foundations are at a point where they are able to permit kind of those foundations to be built. And so from our point of view, 2020 is going to be incredibly exciting in this realm. And I'm being careful what I say because we're working on something and I don't necessarily want to give too much away. But this I think is a realm that is needed, and I think it's going to propel EOS to levels that we have not seen before. And there's very few other chains that are able to do that. And so I'm really, really excited about this space in 2020.
So we've talked about real world use cases, 2020, and we've talked about social or social networking, and we've talked about DeFi. What else are you seeing as real world use cases that can lead to mass adoption? So
stablecoins, stablecoins and fiat gateways. So one of the things that we're seeing more and more is simple relays between stablecoins. So going from one stablecoin to another stablecoin. If I've got a $1 USDC, I should be able to trade it for $1 USDT. I should be able to trade it for $1 of EOSDT. Like it should be one for one everywhere. And right now it isn't. And so there's a lot of opportunity to be able to create those relays where there's almost zero slippage, almost no margins between those trades, and they occur instantly. And that's what really EOS can do. Is we're talking about instant settlement, or very close to 0.5 milliseconds, so very, very close to instant settlement. And if we look at iterations of EOS.io, we've got the Boss chain, which has less reversible block in 3 seconds. And so we're talking about 0.5 millisecond blocks and then 3 second irreversibility. And so we're talking about massive opportunities here for the DeFi space. If you're in the DeFi space right now, in my opinion, with Ethereum, there's no way. It's impossible. If you're in the traditional finance sector, so outside of blockchain, and you want to come in to blockchain, you want to do decentralized finance, Ethereum cannot accommodate that. You're not able to do. You just can't because of the gas fees. You can't because of the latency as well. But even just the gas fees are just prohibitive. If you want to do arbitrage, you just can't. And that's a huge part of what creates a base for a finance system. So those things are just impossible right now in Ethereum, and EOS is really beginning to take that market. However, at the same time, a lot of the capital is still very much locked in Bitcoin and in Ethereum. And so how do we go and unlock it? And this goes back to the last question. How do we go and unlock those funds? But on EOS, it's really creating those relays. It's creating those bridges. So the people that will be creating those bridges, those relays, and making this in a decentralized fashion, smart contract, on-chain, transparent, they let it go, and perhaps they're able to grab tiny fees, but even those tiny fees will be ridiculous amounts smaller in terms of marginal cost than what you currently have. Plus, you'll be able to do it because the system can transact that fast. I think that's what we're going to see in 2020 is going to be a huge game changer.
I love it. Another question from Daniel on the note of people. What can we do collectively to attract more people to the ecosystem? EOS, while great, as we've talked, pros and cons today, it's still a little bit complicated, as he's mentioning. So what can we do collectively to maybe help bridge that gap to get more people going?
I've been thinking of Kevin's question in the back end, and that's how I was going to answer Kevin's question.
Oh, all right.
So it's a good bridge. Kevin's question, and who's this person's question?
This was Daniel.
Okay, so Daniel. Yep. So I think that you've really hit it there. Right now, it's still very complicated to come into the ecosystem, to transact on the ecosystem. And so going back as well to the kind of the fiat on-ramps, et cetera, we need to, I think we're at a point where the foundations are properly laid, where now a big part of the focus and what I think is missing, or what I would really like to see, is some incredible UX. Just facilitating the user experience. When EOS first launched, and still very much so right now, we're in a transition phase, but still very much so, users right now on EOS, from my point of view, are mainly investors or developers, or even if they're just token holders, let's say, if they're not developing, but they're not, let's say, large scale investors, they are mainly power users, or they have to be power users. And that's kind of a problem. What I mean by they have to be power users is they have to jump through all of these hoops in order to transact with the chain. They need to know what CPU is, what net is. They need to know what the resource exchange, which I talked about earlier, is. They need to know all those things. And that's still very much in a place and time, I believe, where we're at the power user stage. My grandma is not even going to go through all these hoops. And maybe my grandma's not the best person. Maybe she doesn't need to use blockchain. But the idea is, if she wanted to use blockchain, she should be able to. And right now she can't. There's no way. And so I don't think that we should be pushing towards a space where necessarily my grandma will be interacting with the blockchain, but my grandma should be interacting with applications that abstract all of the power usage functionalities or requirements from the user, so that my grandma basically just interacts with an application, interacts with a portal of some sort. And that's all she does. Like, let's say it's Candy Crush or whatever it is. She just plays Candy Crush. Happens to be that Candy Crush runs on the blockchain in the background. And she doesn't need to know that, because it doesn't matter. Just like my mother doesn't need to know how Wi-Fi works. She just needs to know that, she can connect to Wi-Fi. She doesn't need to know what HTTP or HTTP 2S or 2S is. She doesn't need to know what SSL certificates are. We need to abstract all of that away. So if I had one wish list, and I think what is missing is really more and more of these portals or more and more applications that are able to build business cases that abstract all of that away, which means they're bearing a cost. And what's missing right now is we need serious entrepreneurs and serious businesses, more of them, that are successfully able to create business cases where they incorporate those costs as part of operational costs and abstract that away from users. So they basically just become the portal for the user. They take care of everything. They now become the power users. And right now we're seeing a transition. We're seeing more of these, but in my mind, we're not seeing enough. We're seeing a lot of applications that have good ideas, but are failing at being good business designers. And this is an issue. So we need more and more businesses that have created businesses in the past, that know how to run budgets, that know how to dedicate funds and create a user experience so that the user simply interacts with their platform, their product, without having to worry about anything in the background.
Lightning round, 2 remaining questions. This one comes from Justin. What do you think the next step of blockchain adoption is? Now, stablecoins are the way blockchain is getting more mainstream, so what's next?
Gaming is definitely part of the equation. Gaming is a natural, it's a natural space simply because people in the gaming space are already used to interacting with NFCs, not NFCs, with, I'm drawing a blank here.
NFTs.
With NFTs, sorry, thank you for helping me, Kyle. With NFTs, they're just used to already having assets on chain. They're used to digitized assets, so it's not a big jump for them. So for me, stablecoins and stablecoin gateways, fiat on-ramps, etc. And then once you have the products, gaming is definitely one.
Last question. You've been in this since 2010. You've seen 10 years of it. Lots of fun and excitement.
Yeah.
We just turned into the next decade.
Yes.
2020, this decade is going to be a ton of fun. What are you most excited about to see happen in the next 10 years?
I'm excited to see the base layer of our day-to-day interactions become so decentralized and so ingrained in our daily lives that we no longer think about this concept that there might be something that might happen to my data that just completely disappears. I'm excited to see where I now have the power to decide what is mine, what is yours. I can monetize that. I'll be able to have control over my online presence, which we really don't have control over. I'm really excited about that. And I think I'm excited more so as well about the power of people. I mean, we are in a globalized, and we're more and more becoming globalized. I'm excited to see what a truly globalized society looks like when the content creators, so the people that actually own the data or that created the data, are able to have control over that data. But what that does, I guess, from a society, a global point of view, what that does for the human race. I'm incredibly excited to see like what level up we're going to get as humans. I'm really excited to see about that, and I think that blockchain is at the base.
I love it. All right, now we're all wrapped with the questions. You had one job aside from answering them. You have to pick. So we had questions from Daniel, Justin, Kevin, Armadillo. I do not count. Neither do you. So of those that asked questions, which happened to be your favorite?
The one that stumped me the most is Kevin's. And I think that was a really great question because what I really liked about that question, what I really like about discussions that are in line with what Kevin asked are future looking. So instead of what's now and why and whatnot, which is really great, what I really like to do and kind of what my job is as CEO of the EOS Nation is, where are we going towards? What's the goal? What's the vision? So that future forward looking. And really, that was Kevin's question. So I have to give it to Kevin.
Kevin. Woo! Shout out. Woo! Best question of the night. Yeah.
Nice.
Here
So
we go.
40 EOSDT to Kevin.
40 EOSDT. So Kevin, Mike, and the team will reach out to you to get your information and handle the processing of all of that. Yves, thank you so much. We ran over time and appreciate you staying. Before we wrap, where can people find you? What do they need to know? We'll drop all the links, in the description, but you got 60 seconds. Give the pitch and where everyone can find you, and we'll go from there.
So Telegram is the easiest place. We can reach us at a Telegram channel, EOS Nation. We also have our Twitter, which is at EOS_Nation, which is pretty big. And if you want to reach out to me personally, just come in the EOS Nation group, ping me. I believe it's at YBNormal, YBNORML. And so, yeah, feel free to reach out. We're basically in this 24/7. So thank you very much, Kyle, for having me on. This was a pleasure. I love doing these. Thank you very much, Mike, in the background as well. And I wish Equilibrium the best of success. We've been following this project from day minus something, and we're extremely excited to see where this takes. Because again, really believe that this is part of what's going to be big in 2020. You guys are at the forefront. So good job.
Thank you, and again, thank you for your time, for all the questions. Thank you, everybody in the community today, for joining, throwing your questions, listening, and participating, and again, supporting us here at Equilibrium. You can find us on Twitter at EOSDT. You can also find us on Telegram if you're not already a part of the chat. You know where to find our man Yves, as he mentioned, EOS Nation. And with that, I'm Kyle Ellicott. Thank you again, Yves. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Have a great night.